And so let's see, it's 11:03. So I think we should just go ahead and get started. So are we still on, Justin? My screen just changed.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so everybody, thank you for joining the California Resilience Challenge 2021 Grant Program RFP informational session and webinar. My name is Adrian Covert. I'm the Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the Bay Area Council and the primary project manager for the California Resilience Challenge. I want to thank everyone here who has set aside some time today to join this webinar. We're thrilled to have so many interested parties across California striving to improve climate resilience in their communities. The objective of this webinar is very simple. We want to prepare as many eligible parties as possible to put forward the best proposals as possible for this grant program. I'll begin this presentation today with a brief description of the who, what, how, and why of the California Resilience Challenge before passing it off to the Pillsbury Law team, Rob James and Stephanie Ankajaya, and to walk through the details of the RFP. After the presentation, we will answer your questions, which you can submit at any time using the question box at the bottom of the screen. We'll also use questions, the questions submitted today and also pre-submitted using the Google form. Thank you everyone who sent pre-submitted questions, to create a fact page, a frequently asked question page that will be a handy reference guide for your teams and for others who weren't able to join the webinar today. That'll get posted to the Resilient Cal website probably as early as the end of today, certainly by tomorrow. And that'll read like a summary of today's discussion. So let's get down to the basics here. I'm going to share my screen. We have a little presentation. Okay, I think that's the wrong screen though. Rob, are you seeing the whole screen or are you seeing two screens?
No, just getting the single slide looks good here.
Single slide, okay, looks good. Okay, great. So what is the California Resilience Challenge? The California Resilience Challenge is legally a program of the Bay Area Council Foundation, which is a 501c3 managed by the Bay Area Council, located in San Francisco since 1945. Practically speaking, the Resilience Challenge is a funding source for local climate change adaptation planning projects across the entire state of California. I think that that's worth emphasizing. This is an initiative of the Bay Area Council that is statewide. So repeat, outside of the Bay Area projects, totally acceptable and eligible for California Resilience Challenge planning grants. The initiative is funded and administered by stakeholders with a shared vision of facilitating projects that will increase and enhance climate change resilience in our communities. And just to elaborate on this a little bit more, we're looking to develop a pipeline of climate adaptation projects across California. We know that implementing projects is very expensive, will require hundreds of millions and billions of dollars in state and federal assistance to actually build a lot of the projects that California needs. What we're trying to do is get on the front end of that and seed the planning efforts that go in before actual shovels go in the ground. And all of the information related to the challenge can be accessed at our excellent website, which is resilientcal.org. And if you have not signed up, put your email address into the resilientcal.org email sign-up sheet. Please do. That is the best way to stay up to date with events and updates with the California Resilience Challenge. So next, who is the California Resilience Challenge? It is the challenge is made possible by the generous financial support of several major Bay Area corporations, utilities, Southern California utilities, and philanthropic organizations. In particular, I want to call out JP Morgan Chase and Company, Kaiser Permanente, the Resources Legacy Fund, Southern California Edison, Valley Water, and PG&E. And additional sponsorships came in from Wareham Development Group and CSAA Insurance Group. Thank you to all of the funders of the California Resilience Challenge 2021 grant program. We wouldn't be here today if not for them. They're not only providing financial support for the Resilience Challenge, but also the main funders of this initiative are also playing an active role on the Challenge's steering committee, which sets the overall goals and objectives of the Challenge grant every annual cycle. You can see the names and the bios of the folks involved in our steering committee over on the leadership tab at the resilientcal.org website if you wanted to look at it further. And in these efforts, we have an excellent, superb blue ribbon advisory committee who is assisting this initiative at every step of the way, from drafting the RFP to reviewing the projects and recommending winners. A fantastic group of people. We're honored to have them participate in the challenge and have their support for making sure we deliver the best projects in California. Again, the members of the advisory committee here are also listed on the California Resilient Challenge website, resilientcal.org, leadership. And so if you want to check out more information about our advisory committee members, you can there too. And so lastly, before I hand it off to the Pillsbury team, I'll just emphasize a couple high-level points about the Resilience Challenge. We all know that California and Californians need greater resilience against climate change. And this challenge is focused on protecting communities and increasing their resilience to drought, flooding, including sea level rise, extreme heat events, which also includes the increased frequency of hot days, and wildfire. This challenge is designed to target improved resilience for under-resourced communities that are disproportionately disadvantaged by climate change. Resilience has corresponding benefits to public health, safety, infrastructure, economy, and the local environment. So when we take those factors into account when we're reviewing projects, and resilience is consistent with the principles of environmental justice and local support, leadership, and implementation. These are the values that we're bringing, that were brought into putting the RFP together. And so with that, let's talk about some details of the RFP. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob James.
Well, thanks very much, Adrian. And I think those values are important for anyone who is considering a submission here. These are going to be the values that we seek to honor in making a limited amount of funds go as far as they can in resilience efforts. We recognize it's a limited pot of money, and we're using it as a megaphone to make sure that we are recognizing projects that not only do good for themselves, but suggest the pathway out for other communities. So on to the next slide. First of all, Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman is a law firm with offices throughout California as well as in other states, and we're very pleased to serve as pro bono legal counsel, as well as service on the advisory committee that Adrian mentioned. Rob James here, I'm in San Francisco. Stephanie Ankajaya is in our Los Angeles office, and Stephanie is an environmental lawyer and also brings her engineer credential and background to the understanding of these projects. There's a lot of legal background for taking local action. It's not only motivated by the external circumstances we all see out the window or in the newspapers in terms of climate change impacts, but there's been a number of mandates and drivers and calls for action. At the state level, cities and counties now are required to incorporate into their general plans the concept of climate change, adaptation, and resilience. That's been the case for 6 years. And this governor's office in Planning and Research office has been championing the coordination of efforts so that we maximize the benefit at state, regional, and local levels. Into that mix comes the weaving of environmental justice as an essential element of these municipal general plans, and a focus on under-resourced communities. And you see both of these concepts reflected in the values of the resilience challenge. There's an assessment underway to report impacts and identify solutions, which solutions can occur either at a global level, state level, or a local level. And we have individual orders that affect specific areas. An example is this executive order on land management. So you have lots of things that mandate that local entities take resilience, environmental justice, and under-resourced communities into account in their planning efforts. But you have these mandates and incentives, but the question is, where do the resources come? When planning, pension, and potholes all enter the public eye in terms of fiscal allocations, planning is a little hard to make its voice heard amid the clamor for immediate needs for funding. Next slide. So that gap between the mandates and the resources is where the California Resilience Challenge grant program comes in. We are trying to facilitate specific planning efforts of the proponents that we do select. And then we also are making use of those as examples to showcase and publicize the range of local responses, the solutions, the innovations that come up for the benefit of a wider population. Indeed, some of the projects that we looked at for last year had tangible benefits that could be applied outside of our borders, and that's great too. If you want to see some examples of what we have in mind, if you go to the resilientcal.org website that Adrian mentioned, you can go to winners and you can see that we had a dozen or so projects that received grants in 2020. And you can click on the locations on the map there to see, first of all, the geographic spread throughout the state, from the north to the south, inland and coastal, all sorts of diversity in the types of projects and the types of project recipients. But that gives you some flavor of what happened last year. Not to say that that's a precedent for how we will evaluate them this year, but it does give you some examples. It draws on the program that we've got here. We've got and Adrian can speak more to the state of the grant program, but I think for your purposes, the fact that we had a dozen or so winners last year and grants in the $100,000 to $200,000 range are some data points for you. They may be a little bit different in 2021, but that's kind of the orders of magnitude. We recognize that with grants of that size, this is not so much for the shovels in the ground as it is for the critical planning efforts that undergo, that are the gating mechanisms for either nonprofits or government agencies to launch the kinds of projects that are needed at scale. So this is a grant program that is focused on planning as opposed to filling a shortfall in a construction budget, let's say. Next slide, please. So the question is, who is eligible to propose a grant recipient in this area? And you'll see that there are two broad categories of proponents that we'll be looking to. First, consistent with the 2020 grant program, are governments, local California public entities, provided that they are, number one, applying for projects that are targeted at benefiting under-resourced communities within their jurisdiction. So we look for that targeting of the communities that we have in our values. And secondly, government entities that are working with community-based organizations. We are looking for proposals that make use of the interaction and synergies between governments and community-based organizations in achieving resilience goals. The second broad category are non-governmental organizations, and the conditions there also are twin. First of all, that they be based in California, so we're looking for NGOs that have California as their home base. And secondly, it's those who's in their mission statements or in their conduct serving, advocating for these under-resourced communities. Again, there's a target involved here, and with non-governmental organizations, that mission is important to us. This is a local program. There's certainly needs for this type of resource at all levels, including state, national, international. You can only do so much with a charter and with the values that we recognize, And so this program is focused at local efforts. Statewide entities are not the focus of this program, and that's unlikely to be a grant recipient. That's not to say that any of these organizations might not tap into the governor's office of planning and research, or other kinds of organizations for assistance and coordination. But in terms of the letterhead of the party that's submitting a proposal, we want to see that to be locally based in these two general areas. So let's drill down a little bit into those definitions. If I could get the next slide. The first one is these local California public entities. We take a very broad view, and I think the touch point is simply those agencies that have jurisdiction over infrastructure or have jurisdiction over some sort of community engagement that can lead to resilience for a community. So certainly cities and counties and agencies that operate at the level of a city or county, a redevelopment agency, for example, would qualify in terms of a jurisdiction that has authority over this type of infrastructure. It includes a range of indigenous organizations. We use a very broad definition of Native American tribes and rancherias that derives from both federal and state listings. If you see the kinds of listings that a public utility makes use of, that's the kind of definition that we tend to use in entertaining proposals from tribes and rancherias. There are special districts that may overlap cities and counties. So in addition to the first category, if there's a community facilities district, a CFD, or a utility district that serves multiple areas, albeit just a portion of the state, those kinds of entities are eligible to apply. And if all of these are eligible to apply, then JVs between them are also able to apply. So if there's a joint powers authority among them, we would look at that, as well as metropolitan planning organizations and local councils of government. In each case, the proposal should indicate some community-based organization or organizations that the jurisdiction works with on the point in question. So if it's a school district, for example, it may be that there's a organization advocating for parents and students in that locality. We'll talk a bit more about community-based organizations more generally in a minute, but we'd like to see that affiliation in the proposal. The question comes up, are you looking for people who have already gotten pretty far along on this and just need an incremental planning project? Or are you looking for greenfield, someone who's just coming from square one, faced with these mandates and not yet having amended their general plan? The answer is yes. We're interested in both. We're interested in how we can advance the planning efforts of someone who's already on their path. And we're also interested at providing assistance to those who are just starting the efforts of modifying their plans or creating a plan that recognizes the climate change conditions that we mentioned, the four horsemen, the fact that it's having to do with underserved communities. If it's got that associated with it, it's a newcomer or someone who's doing something incremental, we're interested in both of those. So for the description of the non-governmental organizations that are eligible for this, I'll turn it and the rest of this program over to my colleague, Stephanie.
Thanks, Rob. So everyone, just to echo what Rob just said, we're looking for NGOs whose principal mission is to serve or advocate for under-resourced communities. And Rob mentioned what the principal mission was, and just want to focus on the next bullet, which is community-based organizations. We figured it might be helpful for the group to have a definition. So a community benefit organization, or CBO, is a nonprofit charitable organization that's tax exempt under 501c3 and whose mission is solely to engage in community benefit activities. The CBOs are included in this bucket of non-governmental entities, but we also want to make clear that the NGO doesn't have to be a 501c3 as long as it's a legal entity that can contract and receive funds. Fiscal sponsors, that's fine too, so make sure you disclose that in the RFP proposal. And just want to emphasize that last bullet, we encourage partnerships between an NGO and another NGO or with a eligible local California public entity. Next slide. So I see a question in the chat about a definition about under-resourced community, so we hope this answers that. So we're taking a broad view. We're not going to be prescriptive about specific income levels, et cetera. I think this bullet point here will cover it. You've got disadvantaged communities, you've got low-income communities. Just we're taking a broad view So I feel like you will know who you are, and we will know who these communities are as well. So this is just also in the RFP, but wanted to answer that question. I actually like that last bullet about frontline communities. I think that's pretty broad, right? You're including people of color, immigrants, people with lower incomes, those in rural areas, and indigenous people. So just communities are susceptible to climate change, yet face large barriers to accessing public funds. Okay, next slide. So getting into the specifics of the proposal, I think Adrian mentioned this at the beginning, we're looking at 4 climate criteria: drought, flooding, extreme heat, and wildfire. In terms of project timing, the project has to start before next summer, and then funds must be used and planning project must be complete by July 2024. The bullet points there. Okay, next slide. See another question in the chat about criteria, so hopefully this one answers that. We've got 5 buckets of criteria we're looking at. So you're looking at community support, and then of course under-resourced communities, which is the heart of this program. We're looking at impact and sustainability, collaboration, and co-benefits. I think this slide actually cut off our last, at the bottom of it, it cut off, but to answer the question, we want you to meet as many criteria as possible while also targeting the vulnerable and under-resourced communities, but we don't have to hit all. Of course, we want as many as possible. And then another question in the chat about the community support. We don't need city resolutions. Letters from the elected officials are perfectly fine, but we do need strong community support, and that's outlined in the RFP. Next slide. I see a question about going back to the previous slide, so let me take it back 2 more slides about the funds for FEMA grants. Here we go. Just wanted to, you see that. So yeah, challenge funds may be used as a match for FEMA or other funds or other sources.
Yeah, because it's kind of a circular problem there. If everybody requires a match, where do you get the funds for the match? We're happy to be that match. So just tell us that the funds are being used, and that may be a positive factor to know that our dollars may be amplified by other sources. Just let us know.
Okay, let's move forward to the next slide. So the actual submission, there's no page limits. There's only 2 limits we've had is the summary, just a 1-sentence high-level summary of the project, and then a little bit more detailed description, 500 words. Things that will require of the submission is the scope, timeline, and then new for this year is the second bullet, organization information, to describe who you are, who your group is, and who you're partnering with. How much money do you need? And we're looking at 100 to 200,000. Identify other sources you're planning on leveraging, and of course, describe the communities that you're thinking about targeting with this project. Describe the 4 climate criteria, and then the other bullets we talked about on the previous slide. And then responses disclosed. These questions will also be addressed in the RFP. Okay, I'll just let that slide sit there for a few seconds. Okay.
So I'll go back there for a minute so folks can take a look. All of this information is in the RFP too. I mean, this text throughout this presentation is pulled directly from the RFP. So the presentation is helpful, I hope. But if you do have want some follow-up additional details, refer to the actual document.
Okay, so we'll go
I might just since back one more time, just sorry, just since we are lawyers, just want to call our attention to that last piece. As we do look for these programs, not to just accept our check and go off and do their things, but we're looking forward to being part of the publicity for the results that are achieved. So we'd like to see a case study, and we want to be able to broadcast that and make it available for use by others. So if you've got plans on something that's going to save the planet, but you want to patent it, this isn't the right place for it. This is the type of project where we're going to want to have the information about it broadly distributed, so that not only people we send the grants to, but the entire universe of local communities can take a look and see what's happening in an innovative way locally in California.
Thanks, Rob. Important point.
Okay, so today's the 19th, and we're holding a session. The submissions are due in about a little under 2 months, September 13th, and they're due by email to that email address, and we'll review it with this team here, the advisory committee and the steering committee, and we'll plan on announcing grants at the end of the year. Again, more details are in the actual RFP and the terms for the grants. And Rob, Adrian, anything else to say on this slide?
Nope.
I think the RFP will go into more detail on each of these.
And I'll just wrap it up by saying that is the email address to send questions and to submit your RFP at the end of this process. resilience@bayareacouncil.org. Again, that is also in the RFP. And Rob mentioned it earlier. I encourage folks who are curious about last year's winners, go check out the resilientcal.org/winners page, and you can see some of the projects that have already won this initiative. Although be mindful, this initiative's criteria for eligibility is slightly different from last year's. And then I believe that's the end of it. So let me take down and stop sharing. Great. And let me, before we address the other questions that were raised, I see we've got 15 in the box. I think some were addressed as we were going along. Let me address some of the questions that were raised in advance of this meeting through the Google form. Thank you to the folks who were able to get those questions in. Big help. First question was, are nonprofit organizations that do projects focused on supporting disadvantaged communities or projects located within disadvantaged communities, but are not community benefit organizations eligible for the grant? So nonprofit organizations that aren't CBOs, are they eligible? And the answer is yes. As with all proposals from all different types of eligible applicants, I just want to emphasize, clearly articulate what underserved community the planning project covers, how that community qualifies as underserved, and how the project will involve members of the community in its development. So I think those would be important points that I would recommend any eligible applicant to follow. Another question was, I am a part of a team that does research into how wildfire impacts various marginalized communities across the state. Would the grant fund this kind of research done out of a university? This one's a little more tricky. I think the goal with the California Resilience Challenge is to support adaptation planning projects to help develop a pipeline of actionable adaptation projects across California. So as a standalone research project, this proposal would not qualify. As a component to an adaptation, a specific adaptation project, it might, depending on the applicant. And actually that reminds me, Rob and Stephanie, the UCs, the universities, I don't believe they were eligible applicants last year, and we didn't change it this year, did we?
No, that sounds correct to me. And I would suggest here is to find a partner. You know, if you can find a specific application of your research that can be deployed in a particular area, particularly with an underserved community, find a partner.
Correct. And at UC being and the CSU being a state organization, again, they are excluded from the eligibility criteria. We are looking for local and regional entities, if not a nonprofit, local nonprofit entity. But yes, finding partners would help. Next question: would it be eligible? Would we be able to include stipends/consumables as incentives for participating in community engagement events? And if so, would a tree giveaway as part of a public workshop count? Yes, the short answer is yes. In fact, one of the winning projects last year did something like this. Not with trees, but we understand we want to support community engagement and people are busy. So making that easier is eligible. Just explain how you propose to go about doing it in the RFP. Next question: what is the expected word page length of each section of the proposal? The short answer is there are only 2 space-related constraints in the RFP that are explicit in the RFP. One is the project needs to be described in 1 sentence, and that's this project summary. Describe the whole thing with a couple clear pieces of information to be included in the sentence: the name of the applicant, the type of the project, and the region to be protected by the project. And that's listed in the RFP, so you can find more details there. And we also want a 500-word description of the project that goes into some more detail. All of the items requested in the RFP for your packet, we just ask that you use your best judgment to give us the relevant information in a reasonable amount of space. And we didn't define it farther beyond that. And so those are the questions that were submitted to us. So I think we can now turn over to the question box. And this first one I'm looking at, I was wondering where we can view the recording of this session. Great question. This will be posted on the Bay Area Council's YouTube page. If you search Bay Area Council on YouTube, you'll find it. So this will be coming up shortly. And also, if you signed up for alerts from the California Resilience Challenge on the resilientcal.org website, you are on our email list, which means you're going to get a hyperlink to this video, as well as a hyperlink to the frequently asked questions page that we will generate based off of all the questions here today. At any point, Stephanie or Rob, if I'm going sideways or you disagree, you let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through these questions. Okay. Another question: can you share how scoring is weighted? Great question, important question that we get often. Scoring is not weighted, and the reason is that this is a relatively new space, climate resilience, and we're judging very different types of projects. Flood projects and heat projects and drought projects in very different, at times, parts of California, from Southern California to the Bay Area to the Sierras and Delta floodplains, and creating a weighting system that could accurately produce an equitable outcome is certainly beyond my skill set and beyond most of the skill set of everyone who's been involved. So what we thought was a better strategy was to err on the side of flexibility and ask for folks to give us the best information that they can. And we'll just have to make a judgment call for creating a slate of projects that reflect the values that were mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. I know that folks like weighted criteria, that helps, but I will just mention that the must-haves are that the project must address either drought, heat, wildfire, or flood resilience in an underserved community. And we give, as several examples of what we consider underserved communities, about 5 different examples in the RFP, and that Stephanie mentioned earlier on the slide deck. So you can reference those features, and those are kind of the must-haves, assuming you're also an eligible applicant. But beyond that, we're asking for innovation and outside the box thinking. Stephanie or Rob, did you want to add to that at all?
No, I think as a private grant awarding entity, we chose to do this without having a formal weighting. And I think that served us well in last year's deliberations. Some of these items are absolute requirements, as Adrian mentioned. The community support, the evidence that this is actually supported, that this money is going to go towards planning efforts that people in positions of authority will receive in good faith and carry forward to completion, is tantamount to a gating condition. So everything would tie for first if we were to try to do some sort of a weighting. It's not something where we're looking at cost efficiency or something else that could be measured. And so you do see a diversity of approaches. Your first planning project may be years away from realization, whereas someone else's project maybe just needs this bit of planning to get over the hump to something more immediate. It's very hard to compare those, and we're trying to reach a broad range of results in the pattern of awards that results, rather than having everything come out fitting a particular mold.
Great, thanks, Rob. Another question here saying there is noise on the call from a phone not being used. I'm very sorry about that. This comment was about 20 minutes ago. I've turned off my phone. I don't know if Stephanie and Rob, if you've got a phone collecting feedback. Hopefully that's limited, and if it's not limited, hopefully it stopped a long time ago. Next question, would a letter of support from either city managers or elected officials suffice? Or are city council resolutions necessary? I think Stephanie already addressed this one. A city council resolution would be great. Letters from elected officials or city managers or a local chamber of commerce or a local neighborhood association, all of that counts. We just want some form of record that there has been outreach to members of your community and they are enthusiastic and supportive about the project. Next question, only one of the 12 winners last year focused on specific plans to provide resilience centers, example given, cooling centers, evacuation centers to assist people who are impacted by climate change, extreme events. Is there something in the scoring method that devalues these types of planning efforts? No, there's nothing in the scoring method that devalues these. It depends honestly on how many projects proposals we received last year that were of that ilk. I don't believe there were many. Resilience can mean a lot of things. If you look at the projects that we had last year, there were infrastructure resilience projects to ensure critical infrastructure doesn't get shut down during extreme heat events or flood events. We had other geospatial analyses projects looking at how to densify urban tree canopies to mitigate extreme heat events and heat islands in underserved communities in Southern California. And the Resilience Center concept is just one of many. And I don't recall how many of those we received last year, but we did select one from last year, and I suspect that another one would be competitive, or at least another one would be competitive this year too. So nothing has changed there, and if you have a project like that, I'd encourage you to apply. Next question, is there a specific tool being used to identify or define what an underrepresented community is? I'll just refer folks again to the examples in the RFP. There were 4 or 5 different ways in which we have recognized, we will recognize disadvantaged communities and underserved communities. I believe that's in section 2 of the RFP, but it's easy to find. It's also in this presentation, which I'll send out to everybody at the end of this program. Funds can be used to match for FEMA grants. That slide went by too fast. I think we went back to that slide. Yes, they can be matched, used to match FEMA grants, or any grant for that matter. Is a private entity owning a public water system eligible? That's an interesting question. I don't believe they would be. But we might have to think about that one, Rob and Stephanie. Do you have a firm answer off the top of your head?
I mean, we've come forward with the definition of public entities. Of course, now we've opened the door with the nonprofit organizations, but it wouldn't qualify under that one. So at least under the way we've phrased the grant programs, I don't think that a private water system would qualify in the 2021 grant program. Interesting point.
Okay, so doesn't look like it. We'll talk offline to clarify that one, and look for that in the fact page when this is over, but does not appear so. Again, for folks who are not qualifying applicants and you have what you think is a good project, I would encourage you to reach out to a qualifying eligible party about partnerships. Virtually every program, every winning project last year was a partnership between multiple organizations, some of which wouldn't have been eligible to apply on their own, but they provided valuable expertise to the qualifying applicant. Are climate action and adaptation plans eligible for funding? Yes, they are. I'm assuming on climate adaptation plans are kind of the essence of what we're attempting to do here. And with climate action plans, Rob or Stephanie, I'm not sure if that is referring to a specific municipal plan mandated by one of the previous state laws that were mentioned at the top. If so, then yes, certainly.
Yeah, just watch the targets. They would be, ones that would have to have these impacts and these communities in their focus, not just the general updating of a plan in those areas.
Good clarification. Are climate vulnerable communities in the Santa Monica Mountains wildland urban interface region, specifically Malibu, Calabasas, Hidden Hills, and Westlake Village, eligible for funding? Without knowing the specific information about Malibu, Calabasas, Hidden Hills, or Westlake, I will just say that areas that are in the wildland urban interface alone on that criteria is eligible for support. I don't know about the other criteria that we're looking for with regards to underserved communities. To the extent that there was a window to provide climate adaptation planning services for underserved communities in this region, then yes, it sounds like there's a path forward for eligibility there. Certainly the climate threat qualifies. What about agriculturally based communities where undocumented make up a significant part of the underserved population? I guess the question here is, our standards for tracking demographic information accurately reflect undocumented workers who would otherwise be qualify as an underserved population, but may not be counted through official census records? I think that's what this question's getting at. I believe yes, although I'm not certain how to parse the perhaps poor information that we have about undocumented immigrants. Rob or Stephanie, do you have comments on that?
I guess I would turn to Stephanie to parse through the definitions already. I don't know how undocumented individuals are covered under the statutory definitions that we already covered. Certainly the last one is quite a catch-all that you would be able to point to in those regards. And we did have a program winner last year that focused specifically on migrant agricultural workforces. And we can just take public knowledge, judicial notice of what that population entails. So I would think that would be a fair subject for inclusion.
Great. Next question. Could this grant contest be set up so that all entries are public by default and presented on some platform, or a public version, at least, of the proposal? Networking and publicity via this means would make entering this contest much more likely for me. So very interesting question here about taking the proposals that we receive and putting them online, which we didn't do last year, and we didn't really talk about it. We put forward the winning proposals, but not all of them. I don't know. We haven't talked about this with the steering committee or the advisory committee. I kind of like the idea, but I don't know if there's an obvious reason to not do this. I'm not aware of it. Do you guys have thoughts on this?
Well, I think we want to encourage candor in terms of people explaining why it is that they need money. I think I'm not able to brainstorm immediately why there might be reasons that someone in a grant application might want to share that information with the entity and not necessarily with the grant making authority and not with other audiences. I suppose we could have an opt-out button or something of that form if it wasn't being done. What I like in the answer, though, and something that I think we ought to consider for the 2021 program, is perhaps distilling the submissions and having categories describing some of the other areas that people are involved in, whether they got the money or not, being able to describe what local communities are doing in a distilled fashion might provide some of that benefit and make good reading on the other end of it, as opposed to making real-time submittals of saying we need to have this 50,000 or we'll have to let people go kind of information into a public domain. So I think there are probably, for every reason that we'd love to read somebody else's grant proposal, there might be some reasons we wouldn't want others to read ours. And I think we could get some of that benefit through a distilled description of the population of submittals, along with the entities that we chose with our limited funds to make grants to.
The easiest way to do it, I think, would be to ask applicants if it would be okay for their 500-word description to be made public. It's a summary kind of made for us already, and they could be free to make some edits to it if they like. But I'm going to go ahead and say tentative yes on this. Let's check with the other partners, with our steering committee and our advisory committee. But I think we'd have to make it optional at this point to applicants. We already put out the RFP. We didn't say that all applicants were going to be made public. So at this point, they'd have to opt in, I think. But I'm interested in following up on this and making this work. So stand by, Tim. Next question. I am new to learning about the RFP and California Resilience Challenge. Are project submittals accepted or allowed renewals each fiscal year? Are ongoing projects with discrete secondary phases able to submit that secondary phase as a separate project for funding? I'm excited to learn about the local community collaborative resources for environmental impacts. Thank you. So to the first question, are project submittals accepted or allowed renewals each fiscal year? So I'm assuming this would refer to a proposal that was made one year and then wasn't selected and then applied again next year. There's nothing to prevent someone from doing that. And I'll just give you a window into the selection process last year. It was very difficult, very competitive. We had nearly 100 applicants and like 90 of them were very good. And then like 30 of them were just excellent. So, you know, it's kind of like picking your favorite kid, trying to come up with winners for these things. The sad fact is that the need is far greater than the Resilience Challenge budget. So long story short, the factors that made a project not win one year may not be there the next year. So I would encourage, if it's not too much effort, folks to apply the same project, updated of course for changing context. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Are ongoing projects with discrete secondary phases able to submit that secondary phase as a separate project or for funding? Yes, there's nothing to prevent a project winner from a previous year applying for additional funds for the second round, provided the project is still consistent with the values of the challenge.
I think that one may also have to do with the fact that they've done a phase one by other means, and all they're asking for is funding for it to proceed to a phase two. And I think, yes, we'd be interested in that one, in that scenario as well.
Great, we got some great questions here. Any questions that we don't reach during this webinar, we will address in the frequently asked questions page. Are construction projects to combat sea level rise eligible, provided the other criteria of the projects are met, that the region in question for the project represents an underserved community, then yes, and that the applicant for the project was a local public entity or regional public entity or a not local nonprofit organization, then yes. But I would refer you to the eligibility criteria in the RFP. Next question, while the focus is drought, flood, fire, and heat, would a project related to farming, food production, regenerative ag be considered if it addressed the main priorities? If it addressed either drought, flood, fire, or heat, then yes. In an underserved community, then yes, There, just kind of stepping back, climate change affects literally every aspect of the human economy. So there, we had to narrow it down to a couple manageable features, which is why we chose drought, heat, flood, and fire, which already itself is chewing a lot. But that said, yes, an agricultural based project, particularly I could imagine one tied to drought resilience, could qualify, provided the applicant met the eligibility requirements and the project had a clear tie-in to the eligibility criteria for the projects themselves, including underserved communities and local nonprofit or local or regional, public entity. Are previous award winners eligible to apply? Yes. Will Bay Area Council staff or others be available for questions via email or phone prior to submission? Once the proposal is submitted, will applicants be contacted if there are follow-up questions, or will a decision be made on the basis of the submitted proposals alone? Good questions. Bay Area Council staff and members of the advisory committee, as needed, will be available for questions about your submissions. Once it is, we did that last year too. Folks had a couple clarifying questions, happy to answer them. Once the proposal is submitted, will applicants be contacted if there are follow-up questions? Yes, if there are follow-up questions. This happened again last year as well. There were a few projects where something we weren't quite clear on, and we called a few. If you don't get called, that doesn't mean you should panic or despair. You could be in the runnings. You just had a very clear proposal.
That might be a good sign.
Yeah, might be great. I thought I heard you mention that both municipal organizations and NGOs are not only eligible, but targeted. If we're considering a collaborative proposal between several orgs, do you have a recommendation for which should be the best to apply? That's an interesting question. Say if you had a community benefit organization partnering with the city, who's the lead applicant? Rob, Stephanie, do you have an opinion on that?
You don't?
Yeah, I think they're, in our eyes, they're created equal, and just emphasize the partnership in the title is what I would do. Because if there is one thing that we are certainly prioritizing, are collaborations between different entities, between different organization types within a community. So who is the receiving the grant and the fiscal agent isn't as important as the firmness of the collaboration demonstrated in the activities of contained in the RFP.
Yeah,
good question.
Who's going to be the prime mover of the resilience project, I think, is an important piece. And the other is simply who's got the bandwidth to communicate it in an effective way.
Based upon 56036, it appears that resource conservation districts are eligible to submit a proposal. Can you confirm that is indeed the case? Yes, that is the case. And as a matter of fact, a proposal last year was from the Humboldt County Resources Conservation District. That was a winning challenge applicant. Is funding allowed to be used for subgrants to community partners? Yes. Very interesting presentation and opportunity. Can a research project / analytic exercise qualify? For example, developing a local resilience scorecard, or does it need to be an actual physical project like a resilience center? It needs to be an actual planning project for what could one day be an actual physical project. Pure research analytics standalone would not qualify unless it was a necessary component to a planning project for down the road, an actual physical project that met the other criteria of the challenge.
Sometimes there can be several links in the chain. As I recall, Adrian, at least one of our awards was to a locality
Mhm.
And so it was a partnership between a local entity and research functions, even research functions in the risk management and insurance industry, that were targeted at developing an insurance product that would help people manage the risks of resilience. So there were like several links in the chain between the research and the government involvement to facilitating a private insurance product that then came to people who had assets that were at risk from one or more of the four impacts. So it can be several links in the chain before you get to the physical infrastructure, and we'd love to hear about it.
A great point. And part of the feature of that project in particular, though, would have resulted in a physical impact, an actual impact on the physical world by incentivizing property owners to, reduce vegetation and fuel buildup on their properties. So yeah, down the links of the chain, there is a net result on the ground that would improve adaptation and resilience. So that kind of has to be a core of it eventually, but so make that case and connect it to a physical project and a changed reality to folks on the ground, and we'll get there. Okay, we need to wrap this up. So last question, are national organizations that do community-based work in California eligible? Rob, Stephanie?
I think we want to be California-based, so I'm leaning towards no on that one.
I believe well, let's follow up on this. I believe you're right, but I think the RFP says that it's preferred that we're looking for California-based organizations, but a national one that it does a lot of work on the ground here, I think might qualify, but I don't know. So let's follow up on this just to make sure. Don't want to give folks unclear information on this. So we've got to wrap this up. Thank you everyone for participating. Thank you again to the sponsors of the California Resilience Challenge, our steering committee members. Thank you, Rob and Stephanie at Pillsbury Law for helping us walk through this. The members of our advisory committee for helping us get to this point. And to you all for being interested in climate resilience partnerships. We will send out a fact sheet based off of this discussion. We'll send out a hyperlink to this discussion on our YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more. If you haven't, please sign up with your name onto the resilientcal.org website to make sure you get all the information that you need to stay up to date with the California Resilience Challenge. Thank you all.
Thanks, and stay safe.